loaded word, but I'll ask. Complicit in covering something up here, Chris? Do you think that O'Brien just kind of went along with his fringe of 30 years?
You know, there was an interesting article of which I wasn't even a part of regarding the Athens County prosecutor, ran, I believe, in your newspaper. The Athens County prosecutor has since taking office, I think 2 years ago, has since brought indictments, I think 9 or 10, maybe more, law enforcement officials and other public officials. And Ron O'Brien stated it's never happened in his office in more than 30 years. He's only prosecuted, I think he's had 3. And I believe, based on reporting, I could be wrong on this, but I believe they were all Democrats. I think Ron O'Brien, just like any other good Republican who's involved in the scandal, asks the question that only the questions they want to hear the answers to, not the questions that they need to hear the answers to. Allegations were brought forward by a young adult that started when she was 18, that alleged that an individual who was in the Attorney General's kitchen cabinet had sexually harassed her, perhaps sexually abused her. We may never know whether or not Ron O'Brien took this case seriously, but we do know this, that the Attorney General of the state of Ohio called the prosecuting attorney. Does he call every prosecuting attorney? He was not involved in the case. As a matter of fact, that case should have fallen under the auspices at that time of the EEOC director, and it did not. Not until Mike DeWine had worked his political muscle. Not until he worked his political muscle. Now, I was here, as you were, Ellen, as many others, Joe and others, were here in 2008. And the Ohio legislature gave the Inspector General the power to investigate the Attorney General after accusations of sexual harassment were mishandled in-house. We remember the accusations, and we remember that we came to find out that it was a consensual, albeit inappropriate relationship. And we remember the Attorney General resigned. We remember that because we were eager to find out the truth. Because the Inspector General was empowered to do so by Democrats and by Republicans. You remember 3 years ago, maybe 5 years ago, when Kathy Collins Taylor, the proposed public safety director, was brought before a full legislative committee in the Senate and interviewed over the course of 7 days, 6 days, I think it was, about whether or not she allowed the throwing of a cigarette pack over a fence line at the governor's office to occur, whether or not she involved herself in the investigation. You remember all that? A paid intern going through law school alleged in April of last year that sexual harassment, and then she alleged that sexual abuse had occurred within the office of the Attorney General with somebody who is amongst the most powerful members of Mike DeWine's kitchen cabinet. Her words, no hyperbole, no political pontification by the chairman, her words.
What do you make
I believe the prosecutor of this county looked the other way because it's politically expedient to do so. I believe the Attorney General, he won't tell you if he's ever called on any other sexual harassment claims. When you run large organizations, there are unfortunately times when employees perform or behave inappropriately, perhaps illegally. And all of us have within, I'm sure the dispatch company, I'm sure within all of our agencies, there is somebody charged with handling those in navigating the process, all the while protecting the concerns and the interests of the victim or those associated with the case, in this case, the confidential informant. The Attorney General of the largest law firm in the Midwest, perhaps the largest law firm in the Midwest, strong-armed the EEOC director to get the name of the confidential informant.
Hey, Chris, this woman, she changed her story. Sorry to interrupt you, but you were starting to repeat yourself. This woman changed her story several times. She told Ron O'Brien under oath that she had actually lied in earlier interviews with the HR folks to try and hide this guy's identity. Mm-hmm. She refused to cooperate after that initial discussion with her supervisor. they didn't have her cooperation, how are they supposed to?
It's all fair questions, Jackie, and I appreciate you asking them. It's important that we all keep in mind that when victims come forward, there are numerous responses from victims and how they respond. In a quick phone call to a crisis intervention center, asking how victims respond to questioning, especially victims who will soon take the bar and then graduate from law school, become lawyers, and ask themselves how on earth they can get a job in this state after they brought allegations against Mike DeWine's best friend. How does that work? How does that work? How does it work when Mike DeWine calls Ron O'Brien, the very person Jackie brought up? Mike DeWine calls the prosecutor to discuss this case. It's no wonder she probably was terrified at the prospect of her name splashed all over the newspaper and her future at risk. We ought to be asking questions not about whether or not the victim deserved it, or the victim recanted, or the victim was truthful, or the victim may have changed her story, or the victim meandered her way through this sad whole chapter. We ought to ask the question, why would Mike DeWine call Ron O'Brien to begin with? Whoa. Why would Ron O'Brien take the phone call? Well, shouldn't we ask the question not whether or not the woman involved in this has because the emotional tumult that occurs among victims of violence and sexual assault and harassment, whether or not it is common to have the Attorney General of the state, the so-called chief law enforcement officer, to strong-arm the EEOC to get the confidential informant's name. We all know why. Other questions? Shorter.